At my dad's funeral, the silence was heavy, the kind that weighs on your chest. We stood inside a vast Chicago cathedral, its vaulted ceilings swallowing sound, stained glass trapping pale winter light like it was reluctant to let it go. Around us sat the giants of the logistics industry, executives, investors, deal makers who had grown wealthy feeding off the empire my father built piece by piece. But Samantha, my sister in law, hadn't come to mourn, she came to conquer. The priest hadn't even finished the final blessing when she seized the microphone. Her voice cut cleanly through the hush, polished and authoritative. With a smile too bright for a funeral, she declared that my brother Zachary was officially stepping in as CEO of our $600 million company. She paused, scanning the pews, waiting for validation, as though applause would crown him king, and that was the moment everything cracked. A sound boomed through the cathedral's professional-grade speakers, a dry, unmistakable laugh sharp enough to raise goosebumps. It echoed as if it had risen straight from my father's casket. It wasn't supernatural, it was recorded. Still, the terror that washed over Zachary's face was immediate and naked. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. I want to see who's part of our community today. To understand why my father's laughter rang out after his death, you have to rewind about 10 minutes. Zachary and Samantha treated the funeral like a corporate mixer dressed in black. No tears, no reflection, just positioning, just optics. From the front pew, I watched Zachary clasp hands with board members, soaking up premature congratulations for a title not yet earned. Samantha admired the cathedral's stained glass, murmuring about how similar designs might elevate the executive floor. They glanced at me the way people glance at coat racks. Zachary leaned close, straightening a tie worth more than my monthly rent. "Relax, Jessica," he whispered. "We'll find you a nice little role downstairs. Someone has to manage paperwork while the adults handle strategy." He smirked, condescension sharpened into a blade. To him, I was administrative filler, replaceable, silent. He thought birth order made him bulletproof, as if DNA functioned like an unlimited line of credit. I didn't cry, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't beg to be seen. Instead, something colder settled into place. Across the aisle sat Peter, my father's chief of staff for 4 decades, the man who quietly held the company together through strikes, recessions, and disasters. In his palm rested a small remote, unremarkable. I met his eyes and gave the slightest nod. That was all it took. Peter stood, moved calmly to the rear of the cathedral, and slid the heavy oak doors shut. The deadbolt snapped into place, the sound slicing through the murmurs. He raised the remote toward the projector behind the altar and pressed play. The screen lit up, but not with smiling family photos or sentimental music. It was my father, Adam, seated at his desk, staring straight into the lens. He didn't look peaceful, he looked ready, calculated, dangerous. Then the laughter began. It flooded the cathedral, freezing Zachary and Samantha mid-motion. Whatever ceremony they imagined was over. This wasn't a coronation, it was an audit. As eyes shifted to the glowing screen, my mind drifted to where the company truly lived, not in glass towers or polished conference rooms, but in frozen rail yards at 3 in the morning. While Zachary sipped champagne at Formula One events or posed at ISA, I stood ankle-deep in slush outside Detroit, negotiating with union reps to keep freight moving. For 10 years, I was the unseen mechanism, the fixer, the one repairing fractures no one noticed. I missed my best friend's wedding because medical supplies were stalled in Rotterdam. I spent my 25th birthday rebooting servers during a cyber attack. I wasn't chasing excitement. I was loyal to a belief that didn't exist. I convinced myself competence would eventually outweigh blood. That indispensability was leverage. In this industry, a woman who speaks is emotional. A woman who silently solves crises is invaluable, so I became invaluable. I audited fuel contracts, re-engineered routes. Cut $12 million in waste in a single year. I called it professionalism. I called it devotion. In truth, I forged my own restraints, duty, sacrifice, obligation. I assumed my father saw me as the engine while Zachary was just the hood ornament. Samantha's horrified expression as the screen flickered proved otherwise. My silence wasn't strategy, it was consent. By staying invisible, I allowed them to erase me. My work became assumed. Infrastructure doesn't get thanked. It's only noticed when it collapses. That assumption was fatal. They mistook quiet for weakness. They didn't realize I'd been watching, cataloging every theft of credit, every idea Zachary paraded as his own. I wasn't just laboring, I was documenting. And when my father's eyes locked onto the camera, I knew he had been documenting too. He saw Zachary bleed the company dry. He saw me treat it like a living system that needed stewardship. The chains were breaking. The noise would be thunderous. If you want to understand why I felt no remorse as my brother unraveled in that cathedral, you need to know what happened 3 days earlier. Our father had been dead less than 4 hours. The coroner had barely left when Zachary and Samantha skipped the funeral home and headed straight for headquarters. I was already there with Peter, stabilizing stock, calming international partners. Grief didn't pause operations, then they burst in. Zachary marched like a conqueror in navy wool, expensive confidence radiating from every stitch. He didn't offer condolences. He dragged his fingers across my father's handmade oak desk. "This has to go," he said. "Too dated. I want glass, chrome, something visionary." Samantha trailed behind, texting an interior designer. "Private lounge, wet bar, maybe even a helipad." "Zachary needs a proper entrance." Peter tried to reason with them. "Cash flow, pensions, obligations." Zachary laughed. "You're obsolete, Peter. Time for fresh blood." Then he turned to me. I was holding urgent shipping manifests. He yanked them from my hands and dropped them on the floor. "And you, Jessica," he sneered, "we need charisma up front. You're good at boring things, filing. Coffee, keep the lights on while I enjoy the profits." They spent an hour dismantling 50 years of work to bankroll luxury and leisure. Titles don't create power, respect does. In 1 hour, they lost all of it. I didn't argue. I stacked the papers neatly. Peter's eyes burned. That's when the plan took shape. They wanted the crown. Fine. It would be heavy and it would sink them. The video didn't show family memories. It showed my father leaning back, arms folded. The camera tightened on his eyes, cold, resolute, unbreakable. Eyes that had stared down collapses and rebuilt empires. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the cathedral like a gavel striking wood. "Zachary," my father's recorded voice boomed. "You have spent the last 10 years waiting for this moment. You have been waiting for me to die so you could finally stop asking for permission and start spending the principal. You always thought my generosity was a sign of love. You thought that every time I wrote a check for one of your brilliant ideas, I was endorsing you." The image on the screen shifted. The video feed shrank to the corner, replaced by a high-resolution image of a massive Excel spreadsheet. The rows were color-coded in red. It was a ledger of sins. "Let's review the portfolio." My father narrated, his voice dry and clinical. "Item 1, the nightclub in Miami. You told me it was a cultural investment. Cost $2,400,000. Status bankrupt in 6 months. Item 2, the vintage car restoration business. Cost $1,800,000. Status liquidated for scrap. Item 3, your personal branding consultants cost $400,000 a year." The congregation was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Samantha had stopped pointing at the architecture. She was staring at the screen, and her mouth slightly open, watching the numbers scroll by. It was a public audit of their entire lifestyle. "People told me I was spoiling you," my father continued. "They told me I was ruining you by giving you everything you asked for, but they were wrong. I wasn't spoiling you, son. I was testing you. I was running a feasibility study on your character. I gave you unlimited resources to see if you would build something or if you would just burn it down. I wanted to see if the golden child could actually turn lead into gold or if you would just paint everything yellow and call it a day." This was the curse of the golden child revealed in 4K resolution. My father hadn't been blind to Zachary's incompetence. He had been documenting it. He had allowed Zacharito consume his own future because he knew it was the only way to prove empirically that he wasn't fit to lead. He had given Zachary the rope and Zachary had tied the noose himself. "You failed the test, Zachary," my father said, the spreadsheet disappearing, replaced by his face again. "You burned it all. But here is the thing you forgot. I'm a businessman. I don't give away capital without paperwork. Do you remember those standard agreements Peter had you sign? Every time I wired you money, you didn't read them. You were too busy popping champagne. But if you had read them, you would know something very important." My father smiled on the screen, a cold, terrifying expression. "Those weren't gifts, Zachary. They were loans, loans against your inheritance. And according to my math, you have already spent every single dime." The spreadsheet vanished from the screen, replaced by a scanned image of a legal document. It was crisp white and unmistakably official. At the bottom, in blue ink, was a sprawling, arrogant signature: Zachary Vance. My brother leaned forward in the pew, squinting. I saw the moment recognition hit him. His jaw dropped, his hands started to shake. 5 years ago, my father's voice intoned, "You needed bail money for that incident in Monaco. You needed it fast and you needed it quiet. You signed this promissory note and equity transfer agreement. You didn't read it because the font was too small and you were too hung over. But let me read the key clause for you." The text on the screen zoomed in, highlighting paragraph 4. In the event that the borrower's total debt to the company exceeds $6 million, the borrower agrees to forfeit all future equity, voting rights, and inheritance claims in the company. Furthermore, said equity shall immediately transfer to any party who satisfies the outstanding debt on behalf of the company. The silence in the cathedral was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. My father paused on the video, letting the legal ease sink in. "Last month," he continued, "your debt hit $6,200,000. Technically, the company could have sued you. We could have seized your condo, your cars, everything, but someone stepped in. Someone wrote a check to clear the books. Someone used their own performance bonuses, their own savings, and their own sweat equity to pay off your mistakes so the company wouldn't go under." The screen changed one last time. It showed a bank transfer receipt. The amount, $6,200,000. The sender, Jessica Vance. "You didn't inherit the company, son," my father said, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a shout. You sold it piece by piece, drink by drink, mistake by mistake, and your sister bought it. She didn't just inherit this empire, she purchased it at full market value. She owns your shares, she owns your vote, she owns the chair you're sitting in right now." I watched Samantha turn to Zachary. The look on her face wasn't love, it wasn't concern. It was the look of a woman realizing she had bet on a horse that had already been turned into glue. She started to scream at him right there in the church, but her voice was drowned out by my father's final words. "Jessica," he said, looking at the camera with a warmth I hadn't seen in years. "The keys are in the safe, fire him." The video cut to black. The hum of the projector fan died down, leaving a silence in that cathedral so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The lights slowly came back up, illuminating the wreckage of my brother's ego. I watched Samantha first. She turned to Zachary slowly. The adoration, the status-seeking hunger in her eyes, it simply evaporated. It was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. She realized in that split second that her golden ticket was actually a liability. She realized she hadn't married a CEO. She had married a man with $6 million of debt and zero assets. She didn't comfort him. She didn't hold his hand. She shoved him. "You lied to me," she hissed, her voice cracking the silence. "You told me it was done. You told me the money was yours." Zachary ignored her. He scrambled out of the pew and ran toward me. His face was pale, slick with sweat. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, I didn't see arrogance. I saw panic. He tried to grab my hand, but I stepped back. "Jessica," he stammered, his voice trembling. "This is a joke, right? Dad was sick. He wasn't thinking straight. You can't actually do this. We're family. You can't fire family." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized something profound. For years, I had been intimidated by him and Samantha. They walked with such confidence. They spoke with such authority. But now, standing there with his inheritance stripped away, he looked small. He looked like a child wearing a costume he couldn't afford. It occurred to me then that their power had never been real. It was rented. Their entire identity was a subscription service paid for by my father's money, and the subscription had just expired. Without the wallet to prop them up, there was no person left. It was the delusion of power from an empty vessel. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single thick envelope. I didn't yell. I didn't lecture him. I didn't give him the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. I simply held it out. "This isn't a joke, Zachary," I said, my voice steady and clear. "This is a termination notice effective immediately. Peter has already deactivated your key cards and revoked your access to the company accounts." He stared at the envelope like it was a bomb. "And inside," I continued, "is a repayment schedule for the remaining $200,000 you still owe the estate. I expect the first payment on the 1st of the month. Don't be late." He tried to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, a king without a kingdom, while the board members behind us began to check their watches, ready to get back to work. Walking out of the cathedral felt different than walking in. The air seemed cleaner, the sun seemed brighter. Peter was waiting by the car, the back door already open. For 20 years, he had held that door for my father. Today, he held it for me. He didn't say a word, but the slight smile on his face said everything. We understood each other. The chaos was over. The order was restored. We drove past the main distribution warehouse on the way back to the office. I looked up at the massive sign, the trucks lining up at the bays, the sheer scale of the operation. For a decade, I had looked at this place and felt the crushing weight of duty. Today, I felt the grounding weight of ownership. It wasn't a burden anymore, it was mine. I had bought it with sleepless nights and missed holidays, and I had the receipt to prove it. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. It was a notification that Samantha had filed for divorce. I swiped it away, then a call from Zachary. I blocked the number. I didn't feel guilty. I felt efficient. I had cut the dead weight from the supply chain. That night, I didn't toss and turn. I didn't worry about what Zachary would destroy next. I slept soundly knowing that the empire was finally safe in the hands of the one person who knew how to carry it. If you believe that leadership is earned, not inherited, hit that like button and share this story. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven the at Christmas dinner? I overheard my parents planning to move my sister's family into my $350,000 condo for free. I smiled and stayed quiet. I let them pack and brag, then I sold it and vanished. 78 missed calls. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Also, Happy New Year. As we step into 2026, I'd love to know, how do you wish each other a Happy New Year in your culture? If you enjoy these stories, please support the channel so we can keep this community growing. The voices coming through the oak door were muffled by the relentless Seattle rain, but the intent was crystal clear. I stood on the welcome mat of my parents' cramped, humid house, my coat heavy with water, listening to the destruction of my life being planned over pot roast. Morgan makes six figures. My brother-in-law Blake was saying, his voice carrying that familiar edge of unearned confidence. She doesn't need a 2000 QFT loft just for herself. I froze, my hand hovering over the brass knocker. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see them huddled around the dining table like generals mapping out an invasion. My younger sister, Sabrina, was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role she had perfected since childhood, the fragile victim. My parents, Richard and Susan, were nodding in sympathetic unison, but what if she says no, she won't get the chance? That was my father, Richard, the man who had taught me that loyalty was a one-way street paved with my paycheck. Once you're inside and get mail delivered there, you establish residency. Squatters' rights, she'd have to go through a formal eviction. In this city, that takes 6 months minimum. My mother, Susan, let out a sharp, pleased laugh. And she's going on that deployment to Tokyo in January, 3 full months. We'll have the nursery painted and the locks changed before she even lands. My own parents plotting a hostile takeover of my sanctuary, the historic loft I had restored brick by brick. The space that was the only physical manifestation of 15 years of 70-hour work weeks as a strategic risk analyst. They weren't just planning to borrow it, they were planning to steal it. I took a breath. I didn't feel the heat of anger. I felt the cold clarity of a spreadsheet balancing out. They had forgotten who I was. I don't get mad. I assess risk and I eliminate liabilities. I studied my hands, arranged my features into a mask of holiday warmth, and pushed the door open. "Merry Christmas," I said, stepping into the trap they thought they were setting for me. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. 4 guilty faces snapped toward me. For a microcond, I saw the raw, unfiltered panic of conspirators caught with the blueprints to the bank vault. Then, with a speed that was almost impressive, the mask slid back into place. "Morgan, sweetheart." My mother Susan rushed forward, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression transforming from conspiratorial malice to maternal warmth in the blink of an eye. "We didn't expect you until at least 7. The traffic must have been awful." I let her hug me. It felt like hugging a pillowcase filled with stones, lumpy, stiff, and uncomfortable. The house smelled of pot roast and damp wool, a stifling, humid scent that clung to the back of my throat. It was a stark contrast to my loft, my glass sanctuary, where the air was always filtered, cool, and smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Here, the walls felt like they were closing in, plastered with photos of Sabrina. Sabrina at prom, Sabrina graduating from the college I paid for, Sabrina's wedding. I was absent from the walls, just as I was absent from their considerations as a human being. I caught an earlier flight. I lied smoothly. I couldn't wait to see the family. My father, Richard, cleared his throat, stepping away from the table where they had just been plotting my financial demise. He looked at me with the wary appraisal of a man who knows he owes money to a loan shark. "Good to see you, Morgan. You're looking successful. Strategic risk pays well, Dad," I said, my voice even. I looked past him to the couch where my sister sat. Sabrina was nesting in a pile of blankets, her hand resting protectively over her baby bump. She looked up at me with wide, watery eyes, playing the fragile mother card with Oscar-worthy commitment. Beside her, Blake, my brother-in-law, leaned back with a beer in his hand, a beer he certainly hadn't paid for, and offered me a smirk that bordered on insolence. He was the idea man, the entrepreneur who had burned through 3 startups and $40,000 of my money, yet still looked at me like I was the one who didn't understand how the world worked. I walked further into the room, setting my wet coat on the rack. My internal risk assessment software was running in the background, tagging hazards, hostile environment, multiple bad actors, leverage ratio 0. I watched them scramble to clear the table, moving papers that looked suspiciously like floor plans. They were so clumsy, so transparent. And as I watched my mother fuss over Sabrina, bringing her a footstool, ignoring the fact that I was standing there dripping wet, the realization hit me with the cold precision of a scalpel. They didn't see a person standing in their living room. They saw a resource, a natural deposit of cash and real estate to be minded until depletion. For years, I had categorized their behavior as demanding or needy. I had rationalized it as the cost of being the capable one. But looking at them now, I saw the trap of normalizing cruelty. They had conditioned me since childhood to believe that my value lays solely in my utility. My success wasn't my achievement to be celebrated. It was a communal asset they hadn't liquidated yet. I wasn't their daughter or their sister. I was their retirement plan, their safety net, and their housing authority. And you don't ask a resource for permission. You just take it, sit down. "Morgan," my mother said, gesturing to the hard wooden chair at the edge of the room, leaving the comfortable spots for the family. "We have so much to talk about, especially with your big trip coming up." I sat, I crossed my legs, I let a small pleasant smile touch my lips. "Yes," I said, "we certainly do." "So Morgan," my father began, leaning forward with the gravity of a man about to ask for a kidney, "we've been doing some thinking about the baby, about logistics." I knew the pitch before he opened his mouth. I had heard variations of it for a decade. It was always the same song, just a different verse. As he droned on about Sabrina's high-risk status and the need for a stress-free environment, my mind drifted away from the damp living room and opened the mental ledger I kept locked in the back of my brain. It was a thick, heavy book filled with red ink. Exhibit A: Blake's disruptive tech startup 3 years ago. He needed $15,000 for seed capital. I wrote the check because family supports dreams. The startup folded in 4 months. The money vanished into networking dinners and a lease on a sports car. Return on investment 0. Exhibit B: my father's pension gap. $8,000 to cover union dues and unexpected medical bills. I paid it without asking for a receipt. Later, I saw photos of them on a cruise to Cabo. Sunk cost, Exhibit C. Sabrina's emergency credit card consolidation. $12,000 to save her credit score so she could buy a house. She didn't buy the house. She bought a purebred doodle and a wardrobe refresh. I wasn't a sister. I was a subscription service. They had forgotten they were paying for mostly because they weren't paying. I was the financial spine of this family. And tonight, they weren't asking for a chiropractic adjustment. They were asking to harvest the marrow, and since you'll be in Tokyo for 3 months, my mother was saying, her voice pitching up into that hopeful wheedling tone, your beautiful loft will just be sitting there, empty, gathering dust. Ideally, Sabrina added, clutching a throw pillow like a shield, we would just need it until the baby comes, just to get settled. The stairs here, they're so hard on my hips. I looked at them. Really looked at them, they weren't asking. This was a demand dressed up as a favor. They were banking on my conditioning. They were betting the house, my house, that I was too polite, too desperate for their approval to say no. In the past, I would have argued. I would have explained that my home office contained proprietary data servers that couldn't be moved. I would have mentioned the liability insurance. I would have fought and they would have worn me down with guilt until I wrote a check for a hotel just to make it stop. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. I took a slow sip of the water I'd been offered in a chipped mug. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, watching Blake fidget and my father crack his knuckles. You know, I said, my voice soft, thoughtful. The shock in the room was palpable. Sabrina stopped sniffing. My mother froze. I hadn't thought about the stairs, I continued, lying with the ease of a sociopath. And the loft is serene. It would be perfect for a nursery. The natural light is very calming, exactly. Susan clapped her hands together. Oh, Morgan, I knew you'd understand. Family takes care of family. I can leave the keys under the mat on the 28th, I said. I fly out early the next morning. You can have the run of the place. We'll take good care of it, Blake said, puffing his chest out, already mentally measuring my walls for his posters. Don't you worry about a thing. I won't, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the bottle of vintage Barrow. I had brought a $300 bottle of wine that was meant to be a peace offering, now repurposed as a sedative. I handed it to my father. Open this, Dad, I said. He took the bottle, examining the label with the performative appreciation of a man who thinks price equals taste. Exceptional, Morgan. You didn't have to, I wanted to. As he poured the wine, and they raised their glasses to toast my generosity, to toast their victory over the resource. I felt a profound, icy detachment. They were drinking to their new home. I was drinking to the demolition. They thought they had just secured a luxury asset. They didn't realize they had just signed a contract with consequences they couldn't afford. I left my parents' house an hour later, pleading exhaustion from the trip. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the suffocating humidity of their home was replaced by the crisp, wet air of a Seattle winter night. I didn't get into my car immediately. I stood on the sidewalk, letting the rain wash away the feeling of their performative gratitude. When I got back to my loft, my sanctuary, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to my server rack in the home office, the room they were already mentally painting pastel yellow, and pulled up the security feeds. I needed to be sure. I needed one final piece of evidence to silence the tiny residual voice of the beautiful daughter that still whispered in the back of my mind. I scrolled back 48 hours. The timestamp read December 22nd, 2:14 p.m. The feed showed my front door swinging open. My father walked in first, looking over his shoulder like a burglar, though he moved with the arrogance of ownership. He held a key, a spare I had never given him. He must have swiped it from my bag during Thanksgiving while I was doing the dishes. Behind him waddled Blake, holding a tape measure. It's bigger than I thought. Blake's voice came through the audio. Tiny but clear, he walked into the center of my living room, scuffing his boots on my restored hardwood floors. We could fit a 70-inch screen on that wall easily. Focus, Blake, my father said, walking straight to my office. He pushed the door open and stared at my workspace, my dual monitors, my ergonomic chair. The framed certifications on the exposed brick wall. He didn't see a career, he saw square footage. This is it, Richard said. This is the nursery. The brick is kind of ugly, Blake commented, tapping the wall, too industrial. Sabrina wants something softer. Maybe we can drywall over it or just paint it white. Paint over the original 1920s brick. The brick I had spent 3 weeks restoring by hand with a toothbrush and specialized cleaner. The brick that represented the history and integrity of the building. Paint it, Richard agreed casually. Morgan won't notice, she's never here anyway. By the time she gets back from Tokyo, she'll get used to it. She always adjusts, that was it. That was the epitaph for our relationship. They weren't just planning to use my space. They were planning to erase me from it. They were banking on my infinite capacity to absorb their disrespect. I closed the laptop. The green light of the screen faded, plunging the room into darkness. The violation was absolute. It wasn't just trespassing. It was a fundamental rejection of my personhood. I picked up my phone and dialed Julian. It was almost 10 p.m., but venture capitalists don't sleep, especially not the ones who hunt opportunities for sport. Morgan, his voice was smooth, surprised. This is late for a risk assessment. I have a proposition, Julian. You still interested in the Pioneer Square loft? There was a pause on the line, a heavy, pregnant silence. You're selling. I thought that place was your soul. It was, I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. Now it's a liability. I need to liquidate. $360,000 cash, that's 60 under market. I heard the sound of a chair shifting, the rustle of movement. I had his full attention. What's the catch? 2 conditions. I said, first, we close in 48 hours. Second, I need an immediate gut renovation. I want the demolition crew there at 10:00 a.m. on December 28th. I want the walls down, the floors ripped up, the plumbing exposed. I want it uninhabitable by lunch. You want me to destroy a historic restoration? I want you to remodel. I corrected. I know you've always hated the layout. Make it open concept. Make it yours. Just start the demo on the 28th. Someone hurt you. Julian said, not asking. Someone underestimated me. I replied, do we have a deal? Send the contract, he said. I'll wire the deposit tonight. I hung up. I looked around the shadowed loft, tracing the lines of the brick I had loved, the floors I had polished. It was just a building now, a shell. The sanctuary was gone the moment they walked in uninvited. Now it was just collateral damage. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in asset liquidation. I didn't pack like someone moving out. I packed like someone sanitizing a crime scene. My proprietary servers, the art I had collected from local galleries, the handwoven rugs. Everything that held actual value was moved into a climate-controlled storage unit under an LLC my father would never find. By noon on the 26th, the loft was a hollow shell. The echo of my footsteps on the hardwood was the only sound left, but I wasn't leaving them an empty apartment. That would be too suspicious. They expected a fully furnished luxury suite, and I was going to give them a theater set. I went to the Goodwill outlet on the edge of town, the one where they sell furniture by the pound. I bought a sofa that smelled of wet dog and cigarette smoke, with a spring that threatened to impale anyone who sat on the middle cushion. I found a dining table with one leg shorter than the others, guaranteed to spill drinks. I bought mattresses that felt like bags of gravel and sheets that had the texture of sandpaper. I staged the loft with the precision of a set designer building a slum. I put the scratching post right where Blake wanted his 70-inch screen. I replaced the high-end Italian espresso machine with a drip coffee maker that leaked. It looked habitable from a distance, but the moment you touched anything, the illusion crumbled. It was a physical manifestation of our relationship, a facade of comfort masking absolute decay. Then came the coup de grace, the Trojan horse. I went into the walk-in closet in the master bedroom, the room Sabrina had already claimed for herself, and stacked 4 large boxes on the shelf. I wrapped them in festive gold paper and attached elegant name tags. Dad, Mom, Sabrina, Blake. They would assume these were housewarming gifts, high thread count sheets maybe, or baby gear. They would tear into them with the greedy entitlement that defined them, but inside those boxes wasn't a single item of value. Inside Richard's box were 5 years of receipts for his union dues bills I had been auto-paying since his pension glitch in 2019. Alongside them was a notice of payment cancellation, effective immediately. Inside Susan's box were the statements for the department store credit card she thought had a limitless limit. It didn't. It had me paying the minimum balance every month to keep the collections agents away. I included the number for the debt consolidation service I had just fired on her behalf. Inside Blake's box were the loan documents for his failed crypto mining rig. He thought the loan had been forgiven. It hadn't. I had bought the debt to keep him out of court. Now I was transferring the liability back to him. And for Sabrina, her box contained the cancellation notice for her health insurance premium, the gold tier plan she insisted she needed for the baby, which I had been covering because her husband was between opportunities. I wasn't just evicting them from my home, I was evicting them from my payroll. For years, I had been the invisible dam holding back the floodwaters of their own financial incompetence. Today, I was blowing the dam. I placed the final bow on Sabrina's box. It looked beautiful. I walked to the kitchen counter and wrote a note on my personalized stationery, "Welcome home. Make yourselves comfortable. You've earned everything that's coming to you." I placed the keys under the welcome mat, the only promise I actually kept. Then I walked out into the rain, got into my car, and drove to the airport. I didn't look back at the building. It wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was just a blast zone, waiting for the timer to hit 0. December 28th, 10:00 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I was sitting in the first-class lounge at SeaTac, sipping a mimosa that cost more than Blake's monthly contribution to society. My laptop was open, streaming the final act of my family drama in high-def 4K. The feed showed my living room. They had moved in the night before, just as I predicted. The place looked like a college dorm room after a frat party. Pizza boxes were stacked on my antique scratch table. Blake was asleep on the dog-smelling sofa, drooling onto a cushion that had likely been used as a chew toy. Sabrina waddled into the frame, holding her lower back. This mattress is awful, she complained, her voice tinny through the speakers. I think it has lumps. Morgan must have kept the good stuff in storage. Well, buy new ones, Susan said, entering from the kitchen with a mug of coffee. Once we sell some of this junk, I can't believe she lived like this. No wonder she's single. I took a slow sip of champagne. Enjoy it, mother. It's the last time you'll feel superior. At 10:02 a.m., the front door didn't just open. It was unlocked by a key I had given to Julian's head of security. The door swung wide, revealing 3 men in dark suits and a crew of 6 construction workers in hard hats carrying sledgehammers and crowbars. My family froze. Blake scrambled up from the couch, wiping drool from his chin. Who the hell are you? The man in the lead suit stepped forward. I'm Marcus Stone, head of security for Apex Development. You are trespassing on an active construction site. Trespassing, Richard laughed. That arrogant attorney laughs to intimidate waitresses. My daughter owns this loft. We have her permission. Morgan King sold this property on December 26th, Stone said, his voice a flat, unyielding baritone. The new owner has ordered an immediate gut renovation. Demo starts now, he signaled the crew. The first sledgehammer hit the drywall with a sound like a gunshot. Crack, dust plumed into the air. Stop, Sabrina screamed, clutching her belly. I'm pregnant, you can't do this. You have 5 minutes to vacate, Stone said, checking his watch. After that, anything left inside becomes debris. I'm calling the police. Richard pulled out his phone, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. This is an illegal eviction. You have to give 30 days notice. There is no lease, Stone countered calmly. There is no tenny agreement. You are squatters in a commercial development zone, and the police are already on their way to remove you. Another hammer smashed into the kitchen island. Crash. Watching on my screen, I felt a strange clinical fascination. It wasn't just satisfying, it was educational. I was witnessing a psychological phenomenon in real time, the narcissistic injury. They weren't screaming because they were homeless. They were screaming because their reality was fracturing. They had built their entire worldview on the premise that I existed to serve them, that my resources were their birthright. By selling the loft, I hadn't just taken away a roof. I had taken away their control. The extinction burst had begun. Where is she? Susan shrieked, grabbing Stone by the lapel. Where is my daughter? She wouldn't do this. She loves us. She sold the property, ma'am, Stone said, removing her hand with professional disdain. She's gone. Look at this, Blake yelled, holding up one of the gold-wrapped boxes I'd left in the closet. He must have found them while looking for a place to hide. She left us gifts. She wants us here. He tore open the box labeled Blake. He pulled out the papers. I watched his face change. Confusion, then realization, then pure unadulterated horror. It's a bill, he whispered. It's the loan. She stopped paying the loan. Richard tore open his box. Susan grabbed hers. The sound of tearing paper mixed with the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the demolition crew taking down the north wall. She cannoned the credit card. Susan gasped, staring at the statement. The minimum payment, it's $4,000, my insurance, Sabrina wailed, holding up her notice. I don't have a doctor anymore. It was chaos. It was a symphony of consequences, crashing down on people who had never felt a raindrop of accountability in their lives. The walls were literally coming down around them, exposing the rot of their entitlement. Out, Stone barked. Now I watched them scramble. They didn't grab their clothes. They grabbed the boxes of bills. As if holding on to the paper would somehow make the money reappear, they ran out into the hallway, a pathetic parade of failures. Chased by the dust of my former life, as the camera feed cut to black, the power finally severed by the crew, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. It was done. The parasite had realized the host was dead, and the host was already boarding a flight to Tokyo 6 months later. Kyoto, the rain here falls differently than it does in Seattle. It's gentler, rhythmic, a sound that cleanses rather than suffocates. I sat on the engawa of my rented makia, a traditional wooden townhouse that smelled of tatami mats and aged cedar. My laptop was closed, my phone was on silent. A courier had delivered the letter an hour ago. It was hand-dressed in a frantic scrawling script I recognized instantly. Sabrina, I hadn't opened it immediately. I had finished my tea first. I had watched a koyish navigate the stone pond in the garden. Only then, with a sense of detached curiosity, did I slide a letter opener under the flap. Morgan, Mom says we aren't supposed to write. Dad says you're dead to us. Blake says you're a sociopath. But I need you to know what you did. We were evicted from Blake's mother's basement 3 months ago. She found out about the debt, the loans you stopped paying. She checked her own credit and found out Blake had used her name, too. She threw us out. We're staying in a motel off the highway. The boys are sleeping on the floor. I tried to use the health insurance for a prenatal checkup and they laughed at me. Cancelled. Everything is cancelled. Mom had to go back to work, retail. She stands on her feet for 8 hours a day. She cries every night. Dad's pension is being garnished to pay the back taxes you used to cover. Everyone knows Morgan, the church, the neighbors. Someone posted the video of the eviction. We can't show our faces anywhere. I'm not asking for money. I know you won't give it. I just wanted you to know that you won. You destroyed us. Are you happy now? I read the letter twice. In the past, these words would have been daggers. They would have triggered a landslide of guilt. I would have been on the phone to a realtor arranging a safe house for them. I would have wired cash to fix the mess I hadn't made. But today I felt nothing. It wasn't hatred. Hatred takes energy. Hatred is an active connection. This was something far more permanent. It was the quiet quit of the soul. I realized then that I hadn't just sold a condo. I had retired. I had submitted my resignation from the job of being their daughter. I had laid off the role of savior. The position was vacant and I wasn't accepting applications for rehire. I folded the letter carefully. I didn't burn it. That would be too dramatic. I simply placed it in the recycling bin next to yesterday's newspapers. There was one loose end, though, the innocent. I opened my laptop and sent a secure message to my lawyer in Seattle. Status of the trusts, the reply came instantly. Executed, irrevocable, education and living expenses for the nephews. Accessible at age 18, trustees appointed. Parents have no access and no knowledge. I closed the laptop. My nephews would have a future. They would have the start I never got, but their parents, my parents, they had made their choices. They had bet their survival on my compliance and the market had crashed. I looked out at the garden. My new sanctuary wasn't made of brick and glass. It wasn't a location I could be evicted from. It was this silence. It was the peace of knowing that my resources were finally irrevocably my own. They tried to take my sanctuary, so I gave them the only thing they truly earned: consequences. Debt, or did Zachary get exactly what he deserved?